Hello and good morning, our Spirit Plant Medicine world, Conscious Living Network, anybody out there on the World Wide Web who may be watching this in the morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. My name is Marc Caron, and I'm here with my good friend and cohort in the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, Stephen Gray. And it's a great honor and privilege today to speak with William Richards. I think we go by Bill from our conversation so far. Now, Bill is a psychologist in the Psychiatry Department of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, the Bayview Medical Center, where he and his colleagues have been conducting research with psilocybin for the past 19 years. He's got a graduate degree from include M.Div. I'm not even sure what that is, but from Yale Divinity School. He's got all sorts of degrees. There's a Theological School, Ph.D. from a Catholic university, as well as studies with Abraham Maslow at Brandeis University, with Hanscarl Leuner at Georg-August University in Göttingen, Germany, and where his involvement in psychedelic research originated in 1963. So, Bill, welcome. I see you've been at this psychedelic research thing for a long time. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this line of work.
Well, gladly. I was 23 years old once. And I was studying actually theology and psychiatry at the University of Göttingen in Germany in graduate school. And there happened to be a clinic of the university psychiatry department in my backyard. And some guy there called Hanscarl Leuner was doing research for some drug called psilocybin I had never heard about. And he was looking for volunteers. And the rumor was that this was a drug that gave you insight into early childhood. And I was studying my dreams then. I thought, well, gee, maybe I'll understand my Oedipal complex a little better or something. And so I went over and asked if I could participate. And they asked me if I got drunk very often, which I didn't. And that was about the extent of the screening. And I was led to this little basement room with a cot and an end table and a little narrow window looking out over the hospital garbage cans. And I was given a shot of psilocybin and left alone. We didn't know about setting in those days.
Mm-hmm. Well, you left completely alone? There was nobody there at all in the room?
They check on me every 20 minutes or so.
Oh.
Basically, no preparation, no guidance. No.
Wow.
And I think what saved me was the piety of my Methodist childhood, and that I decided that God would be with me if any difficult childhood memories came up, and went into these altered states kind of prayerfully. And all of a sudden, to my total amazement, I was seeing what looked like Islamic imagery of abstract patterns and incredibly beautiful scenes. And all of a sudden, there was love and joy and peace and all this stuff, and I was one very awestruck young man. And I remember at the end, the psychiatric resident who gave me the drug came in. I said, "What was that drug you gave me? How do you spell it?" Yeah. I had heard nothing. I hadn't even heard the word psychedelic yet. This was 1963, and Leary and Alpert had been recently fired, but news hadn't reached me in Germany. I wouldn't have known who they were.
It sounds like that one day set the course for your whole life. Is that correct?
In many ways, the rest of my life has been footnotes to that day. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how big, do you know how big the dose was? in terms of what you took then?
Oh, it was 13 milligrams of a derivative of psilocybin, CC74. And in my book, I tell the story in more detail if anyone is interested. But I had 3 more sessions, and none of those were transcendental. So
Interesting, yeah.
I wondered if I was just gullible, if I had exaggerated it. And then I had a 5th session where we raised the dose a bit and came out from the basement into a room with some light and plants. And Wally Pankey had appeared on the scene, and he suggested we play some music. And I really participated in the discovery of the importance of setting in Germany at that time. And then I started volunteering with English-speaking people in the clinic. So that's when I first started guiding sessions. And then went on to a little work in Boston, and then a decade at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in Baltimore. And then 20 years now, actually not 19, that's outdated, at Hopkins. And at Hopkins, as you may know, we have just announced the establishment of the Center for
I've heard of that, yeah.
Psychedelic and consciousness research. So things are opening up in ways I wouldn't have dared to imagine. Very cool time.
Yeah. I wonder if there's anything instructive for people watching this to hear from your descriptions, if you were to describe some of the what some of you and your people learned during that 1967 to 77 period of the research at was it Maryland Psychiatric Research Center? What were you finding out about the capabilities of these substances?
Well, those early studies, it was a fascinating decade, really. We were initially working with LSD primarily, and then moved to work with DP, dipropyltryptamine, which is shorter acting, very similar to psilocybin. And we did some work with psilocybin and MDA rather. And they were initially studies with terminal cancer patients, seeing if we could help people live the end of their lives more fully, with less anxiety and depression and fear, closer interpersonal relationships, which was very promising, and we've recently built on that at UCLA, NYU, and Hopkins. And that may be taking off now and may well become the first legal use of psilocybin in medical care and palliative and hospice settings. So there was that work, and then we were working in treatment of alcoholism, treatment of narcotic addiction, treatment with depressed, hospitalized people. In those days, we called it our neurotic study, but people with severe personality disorders. And we also, in those days, worked with normal people. We had a study for mental health professionals and for religious professionals. Also, in those days, we had legal clearance to train our own staff with good relations with the FDA, nothing controversial about it at all. But when we would hire a new psychiatric nurse, for example, she would have 2 LSD sessions as part of her on-the-job training before we would allow her in the room, you know?
Yeah.
Very different climate these days.
Yeah. One question I was thinking of asking you later in the interview, but you've mentioned a number of these substances now, and I just wondered if you have a take on this at all, or even a sort of provisional view. As I'm sure you know, there's a lot of discussion in some circles about the difference between natural psychedelic or entheogenic plants, and semi-synthetic and synthetic substances, derivatives and created, from scratch, so to speak, in the laboratories. And some people are, as I'm sure you know, Bill, partial to the natural plants as they exist in nature. But I gather you don't think that's a concern, that any substance is going to be okay depending on how you use it in the context, the container, and all that.
I think it's a fascinating research study, or countless studies, really. I mean, if there are indeed about 200 varieties of psilocybin containing mushrooms alone, and some contain other chemicals besides the psilocin and the psilocybin, like baeocystin and norbaeocystin. The natural substances differ in how they were grown and how they were harvested and how they've been stored. And, there's incredible variety. One mushroom isn't necessarily the same as another. But we could do a study. In fact, we'd like to do one. We may get around to it, of taking one species of psilocybin, probably cubensis, and we can put it in powdered form and put it in a capsule identical in appearance and adjusted for dosage with the synthesized psilocybin in the same looking capsule. And you could do a double-blind study and just see if people report anything different. My hypothesis, frankly, would be that there would be just as many anacondas and panthers in both groups.
One of the I think the source of one of that issue for some people, like perhaps in the indigenous world, is they might say, some of these traditions, they might say, well, with the plants, there's contact with the spirit of that plant, and although clearly, as you've demonstrated in your own life and in your book and so on, and many other people have as well, it's possible to have, the ultimate mystical realizations with LSD or other semi-synthetics. But what about this issue of, I've taken LSD a bunch of times, and, there doesn't seem to be any kind of spirit within it or something, like where the people from the Amazon might say, well, you're contacting the spirits of that plant, in nature, and the different animal spirits, the jaguars and the snakes and all these things. And do you think there's any argument for saying that something is missing in that sense from the non-natural plants and fungi?
Well, I think we're all partial to the way we happen to be introduced to this realm, And if my first introduction had happened in the Peruvian jungle with ayahuasca, I'd probably speak that language, by preference. And I honor all the anthropological and shamanistic traditions. I think we have a lot to learn from one another. But from my experience, which I dare say is pretty substantial, I've given LSD and psilocybin to hundreds of people in different doses and over time, and radically different people, in terms of education and race and background and religious interest or lack of interest and so on. And I would have to say, from my observations, there's no question that the psilocybin that gets born in David Nichols' test tubes is every bit as sacred as one could imagine any molecule being.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
And maybe all molecules are definitely sacred, but some are more sacred than others.
more powerful. Well, yeah, Kat, do you know who Kat Harrison is? Kathleen Harrison?
Yes.
Yeah, she talks about how in her experience with indigenous people, they say that every plant has a mother, and some of the mothers are more powerful than others, and I don't know how that applies to the chemical substances, but whatever. Yeah. Well, that brings up another question for me. I don't know if we're jumping ahead too soon right away, but where we are now with all, this, what you might call the psychedelic renaissance, and clearly, obviously, you're involved in the academic world and the clinical world and all that, so on, and yet there's not yet, but alongside of that, so to speak, there is this vigorous and probably quite problematic in a lot of respects activity in the underground, you might say, or the ceremonial, the traditional, and all that. And I guess what I'm getting at is, where you see this sort of reemergence and psychedelic renaissance now, problems and promise and all that kind of thing. And maybe it's a separate question, but where it needs to go from here, from your point of view.
Yeah. Well, as you may know, in my book, Sacred Knowledge, I have 3 chapters, one dedicated to applications in medicine, one to applications in education, and one to applications in religion. And I think they're all important, both with the synthesized substance and the natural substance, if you will. My personal trajectory, for better or for worse, I've always been able to do this legally, with good relations with the FDA, and maybe I'm very fortunate to be able to function in that respect. But my personal primary dream right now is to get psilocybin, focusing on one substance for the present, off of Schedule 1, legally prescribable, and to make it covered by Medicare and accessible to people who are suffering from addictions, from anxieties as they approach death, from depression. And I want to reach these people who don't have tie-dye t-shirts, can't spell psychedelic and could care less.
Yeah, well, indeed.
One thing
I want this to reach out to them in simple, affordable, legal, realistic ways. And
wonderful.
I need a path for that to be possible.
Is there progress in that area?
Well, we're doing 2 major studies right now, FDA approved, one from the Usona Institute, one from Compass Pathways, that are designed in collaboration with the FDA to hopefully demonstrate the safety and efficacy of psilocybin in the treatment of depression. And if those studies, it'll take another couple of years probably before they're complete. We have lots of hard, careful work to do. They're going on from Helsinki to San Diego in different sites. But if those studies prove what we believe it's possible to demonstrate, then I think it's very probable that psilocybin will have a demonstrated medical use, and its safety will be demonstrated for most people. And I think we will see the day that it will really enter the mainstream of medicine.
Oh, wonderful.
Well,
you were going to ask it? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like the fact that, first off, John Hopkins is doing so much work in this field for doing exactly what you're talking about, to, get the scientific study and to, as I love what you said, reach the people who aren't wearing tie-dye t-shirts.
Right.
And I think that's really important because, we've seen what pharmaceuticals has done for many different As you're talking anxiety, depression, PTSD, and things. But it's great to see this work being done with the psilocybin, because I know what you're saying is as soon as it has a scientific study behind it, we're going to be able to reach much more people and make a much more profound effect, I think, in society. Now, I guess my question is, and I guess, we've got the decriminalization in Oakland and Denver, and there's been some movements happening here in Vancouver. What do you think really becomes next? With the research that's happening at Johns Hopkins, you say maybe a couple of years with this science. How do you see it actually rolling out to the mainstream when it does?
Well, I hope to live long enough to see that. I really don't know,
Yeah.
But so far, all I can say is our relations with the FDA have been very cordial and open and intelligent. The FDA is made up of, committees of people who care about quality health care, and they don't want to approve something that's going to backfire and damage a lot of people, So I think they're wise that they move carefully and have very high standards of research, but they're being very collaborative. They've given us breakthrough status for psilocybin. They're working with us. They're not just being an obstacle to try to placate, I think we can be very proud of the U.S. government, and hopefully the Canadian government is similar, that they're really being very unpolitical at this point and really caring about safety and welfare. And when it comes to like treatments of depression, we really don't have anything very effective. The current antidepressant medications really cover up masked symptoms. They have many side effects. They don't work for a lot of people. And if 1, 2, 3 well designed psychedelic sessions with good preparation and skilled guidance and integration and the right dose of the pure substance, if that can really reset the brain, as Robin Carhart Harris would say, help people break out of their depressive ruts, that's a major step forward in mental health for the world, really.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, just hearing you say that, Bill, it's heartening, and also personally, I feel really honored to be able to hear this inside, what you might call insider information from you. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. The title of the talk you're going to give at the conference, I believe, is Awakening and Integrating. Correct?
Actually, I was wondering what it
was. Okay, well, I'm telling you. That's what I have on the schedule now. Assuming that's it, you've just mentioned the word integration a moment ago as well. So could you give people a little bit of a teaser about what you're talking about? And integration, for example, is become, I've noticed, a really hot topic in the psychedelic world these days. People are, the sort of psychedelic renaissance, if you'll accept that term, seems to have matured enough at this point where people are kind of looking more closely at, you don't just have these experiences, like Houston Smith is famous for saying something like, it's clear that the psychedelics can induce a religious experience, but much less clear they can produce a religious life, right? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what you may talk about at the conference?
Oh, sure. I like to back up a little bit just to stress most people who listen to this podcast will probably know this, but that there is no such thing as kind of the psychedelic experience. That there are many, many different states of consciousness. that are accessed with psychedelics, and that are also accessed in meditative disciplines and spontaneously in the runner's high and creative performance and natural childbirth, and you name it, So it's important that we just not generalize about these psychedelic experiences. Some are perceptual changes that may be delightful, but not especially transforming. If you go about it without knowing what you're doing, you may just get paranoid and confused, and that's maybe negative. If you know what you're doing and you go in with a sense of trust and courage and interpersonal grounding, which is a term I like to use a lot, you may get into psychodynamic realms, dealing with your grief and your guilt and your interpersonal relationships in your childhood and so on. That's all incredibly valuable. It's kind of the terrain of conventional psychotherapy. And then, if you will, if the dose is adequate and the trust is deep enough, you may get into these profound symbolic archetypal realms of encountering gods and goddesses and other civilizations and precious gemstones and you name it. Who knows where that comes from? We see this stuff with our eyes closed, but it very reliably appears, Jung would call it the furniture of the collective unconscious, I think. It simply seems to be genetically encoded in us or spiritually accessed. And there are anacondas and panthers here, and all elves and gnomes and everything you could wish for, angels and demons, But then, if you will, even beyond that is this unitive state. And that's also beyond language and our usual human concepts of thinking. So it's very hard to talk about. For even to say whether I experienced it or it experienced me, or whether my everyday self, died and this experience happened. And when I was reborn, I discovered this experience in my memory banks. It's hard to even decide how to describe it. But when this unitive, transcendental experience occurs, what the religious community calls eternity, I think, a realm beyond time and space, permeated by love, it's really profound. And it seems to have very powerful effects on how you view yourself and other people in the world afterwards. And sometimes that experience almost integrates itself. And other times it seems to kind of sit there like a memory. And people need to talk about it and write about it and do art and do some new behavior patterns in life in order to facilitate the integration of it. So I think integration depends a lot on what happens and who you are and where you are in life and what you need to do. But basically, I see integration as a lifelong process. You don't say, well, 3 days later, well, I've integrated that one now. Let's go have another one. It really triggers very much what Abe Maslow called the process of self-actualization or spiritual development, or what Carl Jung called individuation. The real psychological and spiritual unfolding of human potential.
Are you aware of this term? I'm sure you are. Spiritual bypassing. Do you think about that much? And do you find it a concern in this work?
Oh, it may be a strategy some people stumble through in their early attempts to integrate. Um, I'm struck with how few people kind of become grandiose and have to run around wearing feathers and impressing other people.
How few people fall into that trap. Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I may be wrong. But there's something very humbling and sobering about these experiences.
Mhm.
I think the word sacred really applies.
Mm.
And um, yeah, it's true. What the line, what does the enlightened man do? Well, he chops wood and carries water. Jack Cornfield after the Enlightenment, the laundry,
Yeah. I thought it was before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water, and after enlightenment, get your students to do it for you. Yeah, anyway.
I think it's a great question, Stephen, in regards to integration, because we see that in a lot of the work that we do in the community that we've been building here, Bill. People are really keen on community building and surrounding themselves with like-minded people so that they can actually speak and share about their experiences so they can help understand and integrate that as well. How do you feel, or do you see anything with the research you guys have done at Hopkins that helps people in terms of, community building and things of that nature?
Yeah, well, at Hopkins, to some extent, we're limited by specific research designs for specific projects. We're really doing research, not treatment or community building. That's not our academic mission.
Mhm.
Do you see a need with the people that are,
Yes.
I guess, being your patients? Is there a need from them where they express something
Yeah.
like that?
After these profound experiences, we often talk about it like trying to find your tribe,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and more of these groups like psychedelic societies, integration circles are forming in cities throughout our lands, and they're really, you could see them as the beginnings of new churches, even.
Mhm.
Uh, they develop their rituals and their symbols and their opening and closing ceremonies. And this is the history of religion as I see it. Always changing, always transforming. I wish the established churches could wake up more fully to this frontier.
Oh boy.
And because they're already communities with
Mm.
essentially the same values,
Mm.
that are in place.
And they have the great buildings already.
Yeah, they have beautiful architecture and
Yeah.
great pipe organs and you name it,
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
there's no reason we have to start from scratch and erase everything that's been done. But religions are slow to catch up with sociologists and
Mhm.
anthropologists, actually.
Yeah.
But I have hope. Um, it's interesting. I graduated from Yale Divinity School, and I've been uh, asked to present to the Yale Psychiatry Department. And there's a community in the School of Medicine, probably about 20 very dedicated psychedelic researchers who are dealing with mystical experiences every day, But I haven't heard anything from the Divinity School yet.
Interesting. Yeah.
Day will come when I will.
Yeah.
But um, it just takes a while.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. Uh, I don't know if you have concerns about, I'm just wondering, I wanted to ask you about this, this amazing, well, I would say remarkable work that, you and your colleagues and others in this area are doing to try to get substances like psilocybin legalized in the way you spoke about earlier in our conversation. We have one of the other speakers who's coming to the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference this year is Jamie Wheal, Wheal. He has a book called Stealing Fire, and I got onto him because somebody sent me a link to a YouTube interview that someone did with him. I think you'd find it really interesting to look at it. It's called "Is the Psychedelic Renaissance Doomed?" And so I'm just wondering if it's been on your radar at all as you're trying to do this very kind of delicate work of, moving through these different kind of levels of bureaucracy and so on. Do you think some of the kind of things that Jamie Wheal is talking about is, it's kind of outside of that world, the commodification and commercialization and the hedonism associated with, and now with these, festivals and so on. Do you think there's any danger of some kind of generation of a backlash, or back in the 60s there was so much sensationalism, people are jumping off buildings with LSD and so on. Has it been on your radar at all to, is there anything that you would want to say to people watching this podcast to be aware of or concerned about as we move forward in getting these substances more recognized?
Well, I would certainly plead with everyone to be cautious and responsible and not make premature claims, to own your own experiences, but not necessarily to impose them on others, there really is a lot we don't know yet, even though these drugs and natural substances have been around for thousands of years. We have lots to learn. I think we need to stay humble and open. So far, I haven't seen any backlash. And I think that's a tribute to, this is a very different decade from the 60s. Many of those who took psychedelics in college in the 60s are now in positions of authority. They are our judges and our lawyers and our clergy and most of them know that many, if probably most of their friends who took psychedelics did not jump off buildings or have deformed babies or whatever, and that those scare tactics that actually made it into government pamphlets back in the 1960s.
Oh yeah.
Really are ancient history.
Phew.
And it's not only the government, but the press has been very, very responsible, not sensationalistic, not, now and then there's a title of an article that I wish had been worded differently. But basically, it's been based on very solid science at Hopkins and other sites. Research that's been very responsibly crafted and done in respectful communication with the Federal Drug Administration. And so far, what we found has been a lot of evidence for safety and exceptional efficacy. We have lots of work still to do, but it really is hopeful.
That's great.
Don't want anyone to jump up and down prematurely and spoil it.
Really appreciate your positive attitude about all that, Bill. It's fantastic. Marc, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just had a question in regards to, you say there's lots we still don't know, and I'm sure that's completely true. Now, in the research that's been done over the years at Hopkins, have you seen anything that is a specific or constant downside to working with psilocybin?
I would say no.
Good.
I mean, there's a lot of psychiatric conditions and physical health conditions we have not worked with, that we screen subjects pretty narrowly to have a sample of very comparable people for each research project that we do. For example, right now we're asking, well, would a psilocybin session be helpful to someone in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease? Might it be helpful to people on the autistic spectrum? Might it be helpful to help early sociopaths discover a system of ethics?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great.
Incredible frontiers, and we don't know the answers yet.
Yeah,
I do have a question or a statement from one of our Facebook viewers, Jan Grieger. She's asking about how about addressing radical social justice and identity politics that has riddled the psychedelic movement. Identity politics versus spiritual religious experiences. What's either of your take on that, gentlemen?
Oh boy, I don't know. Bill?
I don't usually like to talk politics, but it's a radical social justice.
Yeah. There has been some discussion. Most of it is ancient history now, I hope. Concern about for-profit and non-profit structures in financing the research. I have no doubt personally that both can be very constructively helpful. I think the divine, if you will, does work through economic forces as well as interpersonal forces. Shiva's dance includes economic forces, I think. and there are certainly profits, if they are made, that can be plowed right back into psychedelic research and making this available to the man on the street. I don't think the for-profit people want more yachts in the Caribbean. They really are, the ones I have met, concretely through Compass Pathways, are profoundly spiritually developed people who care deeply about the quality of this work. And I have profound respect for them. And but I think there are many ways of working, and one doesn't preclude another. And we each make our contributions as we're able. Another thought I'd like to just throw out there. I think of my son's father-in-law, who is Iranian, grows his own opium in his backyard, and he's a physician, retired, and he likes to use natural opium, and there's nothing wrong with growing your own, as I would see it, Why should that be illegal any more than growing your own psilocybin mushrooms, And yet I would say when I am in the hospital in pain, I really appreciate the possibility to have a shot of Demerol or Dilaudid or morphine, where I know the purity of the substance and the exact dosage, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And there's a place for these substances in mainstream medicine, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as well as in more informal, grow your own contexts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see where that one is right and one is wrong, or one is moral and one is immoral, or one is ethical and one is unethical, or whatever. You know,
Yeah, wonderful. Excellent. Yeah, great attitude.
Yeah.
Well, I could, I personally have a whole whack of other questions I could ask, but we've been going here for 45 minutes or so. Maybe we should give you a break and you go deal with your person who's coming to repair your house or whatever it is. I don't know. Are you okay, Marc, with this?
Yeah, it's perfectly great. I'm just delighted to have had the time to get to know you a little bit, Bill, and your work. If there was one thing that you would, maybe from all the work you've done over the years, is there anything you'd like to share with the world in terms of your vision, your desire, what you'd like to see happen moving forward? If you could just, wave a magic wand and it would happen, what would that kind of be?
Nothing that comes to mind right now, but I'm sure there's a whole list of things.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of it already, and
I hope many of the viewers will be able to come to the conference. It sounds like a wonderful gathering of struggling people who are waking up and care deeply about this field.
Mm-hmm. And
the model that I have these days of the enlightened person, insofar as there is such a creature, is maybe a person who has one foot in the eternal, transcendental world and one foot in the everyday world of time and space, of chopping wood and carrying water. And that when you're in one world, you don't forget the other, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
And I think in many ways that's the human condition. And if we can evolve into more intelligent, compassionate human beings with the help of these catalysts called psychedelic substances, I think that would be fantastic. But I think we have to take it very slowly, one step at a time, and very carefully, and give these substances the respect that they deserve.
That sounds like a great little way to end it there, Bill. And again, I've been quite, I would even say, moved by hearing you speak about this fantastic work that you're doing, and we're really lucky to have you. Thank you, and have you coming to the conference. Bill's going to be giving the opening keynote address at about 7:30 p.m. on Friday, November 1st. Do you want to say anything more about the conference, Marc, before we round up here?
Not so much. Just I want to thank Bill for taking the time to chat with us this morning and going through the techie stuff to get started. So I thank you very much for your patience and your time, Bill. I really grateful for that. And for any of the Facebook watchers out there, we have a little code we throw in here as a discount for the conference. FBL33 for Facebook Live 33 gets you a discount on your ticket. If you watch this video, you can enjoy that. And yeah, that was really about it. I'm just really honored and grateful to learn from some of these world-renowned experts. Thank you very much, Bill.
We're all learning from one another.
Wonderful. Well, we'll see you in Vancouver in just about 5 weeks from now.
Exactly. Busy. Yeah. I love it. Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Bill. And until next time, everyone out there, thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Yeah.